The spring transfer window is officially open. Who are some names that Texas fans need to know? We've got the list on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Intro.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're locked on to the Texas Longhorns. I'm your host, BK Brad Kellner, Texas grad, Austin native, and longtime sports radio host in the Lone Star State. Thank you for making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell your Longhorn friends about Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We'll talk a little Texas baseball later in the program. A nice midweek victory for the Longhorns last night. We'll start to preview this huge upcoming series against Auburn that begins tomorrow. But first, some Texas football. The NCAA Transfer Portal is officially open for business. Of course, the Longhorns have already been working in the portal this week, landing former Stanford wide receiver Emmett Mosley V on Monday. We talked about him during yesterday's show. If you missed that, be sure to check it out. But obviously, there's more to be done. And we'll take you back to last week before we dive into some names that you need to know who are currently in the portal or are about to be in the portal. We'll let you hear from Steve Sarkisian. Again, this is last week. Sark was asked about the Longhorns' plans in the spring portal window, and here's what he had to say.
Well, we're always going to evaluate the portal, and as you know, for those that know, I mean, we really try to identify the portal to where we think there's a need, but yet also is the person we're bringing in an upgrade to maybe what we have, or can it supplement what we have at certain positions? Naturally, there's a couple positions depth-wise we're not where we need to be right now, so we'll look at the portal that way. Our numbers are down at receiver right now. From a scholarship standpoint, our numbers are down on the defensive line from where our numbers really should be, and our numbers really down at tight end. And so it's not a secret that we'll look to the portal. But I don't want to take a guy just for a number. I want to take, if you're going to go in the portal, can he help that room play at even a higher level? And so we'll have to assess it. It's free agency, I like to say, but they have to opt into free agency. And so it's not like you can just say, hey, we need a defensive tackle, let's go get a really good one. If they're available, sure, we'll try to, but that doesn't mean that caliber of player will be available.
So there's Sark talking about Texas's plans for this spring portal, which opened today and closes 10 days from now on April 25th. He mentioned three positions there: wide receiver, tight end, and defensive line. Of course, Texas already landed a receiver, so I'm not 100% sure they are still in the market for a wide receiver. Again, those comments you just heard from Steve Sarkisian came last week, so before the Longhorns landed Mosley on Monday. So we don't know for sure if the Mosley acquisition is enough for Texas in the wide receiver room, or if they're still going to be in the market for one more. And hey, for the sake of today's video and episode, I'm still going to give you a wide receiver name to pay attention to. So we've got one receiver, we've got one tight end, and we've got one defensive lineman that the Longhorns should be going after. These are players that are either already in the portal or guys that are expected to be entering very, very soon. We'll start with wide receiver, since we just talked about Emmett Mosley V. I think the only way that Texas really goes after a receiver is if a guy who can help in the return game is an option. So a guy who can play wide receiver, but a guy who can also help on special teams as well. Of course, the Longhorns lost Silas Bolden from last year's team. So not only is there an open spot at wide receiver, but there's an opening at punt returner as well. And that's a position that has been pretty impactful for the Longhorns these last few years, and a position that has also been filled by wide receiver these last few years. Now, obviously, Texas can use a wide receiver they already have. They can use a running back. They can use a defensive back. There are plenty of options to fill the void of Silas Bolden leaving. But you look at the last 3 years, Texas has used a receiver as its primary punt returner, with Xavier Worthy in 2022 and 2023. And then, of course, the aforementioned Silas Bolden this past season. So there is a name out there. a guy who plays wide receiver, but is also a very, very good returner as well. That is Syracuse transfer Trevor Pena, spelled like Trevor, but with a B instead of a V. So Trevor Pena, who had a fantastic season for the Orange in 2024, about 84 catches, 941 yards, and 9 touchdowns. He was their best receiver. He was also named a team captain. He was second team All ACC this past year. So there you go. There's some numbers as a receiver, but also Trevor Pena is an elite return man, averaged 27 yards per kick return and 8 yards per punt return this past season. And he's been a returner for a number of years at Syracuse. He actually will enter the 2025 season ranked fourth amongst active FBS players in career kick return average. So he's been a punt returner. He's also been a kickoff returner. And again, fourth best career kick return average amongst every active player in FBS college football right now. So there's a guy who can fill a couple of voids. He can kill two birds with one stone. And he's a guy who has some skins on the wall, both on offense and on special teams as well. He's going to be a 6th-year senior. So this is a one-and-done rental type of player that Texas would be bringing in. Again, put up great numbers in 2024. He only played in one game in 2023. Got hurt, dealt with a hamstring injury that caused him to miss the majority of the season, which is why he's eligible for that 6th year. But he's a crafty route runner. He's got great ball skills, a guy who can get open, who can be a reliable target for Arch Manning in this passing game, and also a dude who can help with the return game as well. 6 foot, 184, at least that's what he was listed at on Syracuse's roster last season. So again, that's a move, a guy a lot of people are going to be interested in, but a move that makes sense for Texas. Again, it gives them one more experienced wide receiver and also helps answer any sort of question about who is going to be this team's primary returner for the 2025 season. So pay attention to Trevor Pena from Syracuse. Now we go to tight end, position number 2 on this list of 3 positions we're talking about today. Another big-time name and another guy who's going to generate a ton of interest on the open market, assuming he enters the portal. That is Cal tight end Jack Endries. Hey, you got a guy from Stanford? Go get a guy from Stanford's biggest rival at Cal. Steve Sarkisian, a left coast guy. He's got a bunch of ties to the state of California. Maybe the Longhorns can be in the mix for Jack Endries, the 6'4", 240-pound tight end who was a freshman All-American 2 seasons ago. This past season at Cal, how about these numbers? 56 catches, 623 receiving yards, added a couple of touchdowns as well. Pretty good. And we've talked about this a lot on this channel. Texas's tight end room has 0 career combined catches. So last season alone, Jack Endries had 56. The combination of Spencer Shannon, Jordan Washington, Amari Winston, Nick Townsend, Michael Terry, anybody else you want to throw in Texas's tight end room right now, 0 career catches. By the way, Jack Endries is rated the number 2 returning tight end in the country by Pro Football Focus. That's not the number 2 transfer tight end. That is the number 2 returning tight end in all of college football. Again, that courtesy of Pro Football Focus. So the numbers tell the story. Pro Football Focus tells the story. 6'4", 240. The size is what you want. This is a guy that when he does hit the portal is going to get a lot of interest. Alabama has apparently been linked to him. Miami has been linked to him. Oklahoma has been linked to him. By the way, Oklahoma just landed Jaden Ott, the running back transfer from Cal. So maybe that worries you a little bit. Those guys have a good relationship. Maybe you're worried about injuries following Ott to Norman. Another team that could be in the mix is Indiana. You're like, that's weird, BK. I get Alabama, I get Miami, I get Oklahoma. We're not talking about basketball here. Why'd you bring up IU? Well, Cal's quarterback transferred to Indiana earlier this offseason and is expected to be their starter in 2025. So Jack Endries put up pretty good numbers at Cal with this quarterback in 2024. If he wants to try to run it back with the same QB, then Indiana could make some sense right there. Hell, they might be the favorite because of that. But that is the best tight end that is going to be in the portal. Again, assuming he does enter the portal. There are multiple reports out there that say it's just a matter of when, not if, for Jack Endries. But that is the top tight end. And you think about how important that position has been for Texas the past 3 years with JT Sanders and Gunnar Helm holding it down. I hope Texas is willing to spend big and invest in that position to make sure there's no big drop off this coming season. Now, last but not least, we go to the defensive line. I think the interior D-line needs at least one, if not two, new faces. Again, Sark said the scholarship numbers are pretty low, especially in the spring window. Now, Texas brought in 3 interior D linemen in the winter window, but it could be in the where Brandon Harris and his recruiting staff has to do a really good job to find somebody out there that is good enough to play at the University of Texas. And when I say play, not just, eat a couple of snaps, but a guy who's actually good enough to contribute at the University of Texas. Apologies for that little glitch. I might have just lagged for a second or two, but I think everything is back on track. So Texas needs some more depth on the interior. That's why I think 2 guys could be an option. But, man, if they can get at least one, that's a step in the right direction, and that helps fill that defensive tackle room. A name to keep an eye out for, UNLV transfer Andrew Whitmore, who started his career at Austin Peay, spent the last 2 seasons in Vegas with the Runnin' Rebs, 31 tackles, 5.5 TFLs in 2023, about 40 tackles and 7 TFLs in 2024. He graded out as one of the top run defenders for UNLV this past season. 6'2", 290 pounds, a big body, better against the run than against the pass. I'd love to find somebody who's a little bit more disruptive as a 3 technique, who can kind of get after opposing quarterbacks as well. I don't know if Whitmore is that type of guy. At least his numbers don't indicate that he is that type of guy. But another big body on the interior of your defensive line, a 3-star transfer according to On3. But Yahoo Sports has Whitmore as one of their 15 best players currently available in the portal. So again, more guys are going to enter today, tomorrow, throughout the course of these next 10 days. But as of a couple of days ago, Andrew Whitmore ranked as one of the top 15 guys for Yahoo Sports. So that's one dude that Texas could be in the market for. Again, keep an eye out for a few other names of guys that could be entering in the not too distant future. But Whitmore, a guy with back-to-back productive seasons at UNLV, a lot of experience in college football. He's a dude that could help fill the defensive tackle rotation. He's not going to be Alfred Collins. He's not going to be Vernon Broughton or Devondre Sweat or Byron Murphy, but a guy who could fill maybe a Tia Savea type of role, a Bill Norton type of role, just somebody who, again, is a part of things and can add to your depth up front on defense. So there you go. 3 names, 1 at receiver, 1 at tight end, 1 at defensive line to keep an eye on. Obviously, if more news breaks, we'll have more. If more guys enter the portal, we will update that list. But using Sark's words, I figured we should talk about those 3 positions on today's episode. Speaking of Texas football, speaking of the transfer portal, I wonder if there's another position of need for the Longhorns. Sark didn't talk about this one, but there's one more spot that I think Texas needs to address, but probably won't. I'll tell you what that is coming up next right here on Locked On Longhorns. But first, a word for our friends at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here. You've got more play-in action tonight, and then the real postseason gets going this weekend. And our friends at FanDuel giving new customers an incredible way to get in on all of the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. FanDuel is super easy. You can go online to FanDuel.com, or you can download their free app as well. From 3-pointers to steals to assists, picking your favorite team, player props, it doesn't matter. However you want to bet on the game, you can win big with our friends at FanDuel. Plus, they've got live in-game betting as well. So many chances to win big throughout the NBA postseason. Do not miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. One more time, it's FanDuel.com. Back here on Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. In segment 1, we played the sound of Steve Sarkisian talking about the biggest positions of need for Texas in the portal. He mentioned receiver, tight end, and defensive line. All of those spots are definitely needs, and I think those are the top 3 needs for Texas right now. I think there's one more need on this Texas roster, and that's offensive line. The Longhorns, of course, lost 4 starters on last year's O-line. Kelvin Banks, Hayden Connor, Jake Majors, and Cam Williams All of those dudes hoping to hear their names called next weekend in the NFL draft. Kelvin Banks is going to be a first-round pick. Connor and Majors were multi-year starters here. Cam Williams was really good at right tackle. Minus all the false start penalties, but still had a great season, and he's going to get drafted next weekend. Point is, those guys won't be easy to replace, and you only have one starter back from last year's team, so you're a bit behind the 8 ball there. I will say this. I feel good about the Horns' projected starting 5, even with those 4 new starters, right? Like Trevor Gooseby is your likely left tackle replacing Kelvin Banks. Trevor Gooseby was amazing in that A&M game. He was really good in the SEC championship against Georgia. Had to come in and play right tackle for Cam Williams against Clemson. Gooseby showed me a lot. That's a guy with a good year, could potentially be a first or second round pick in next year's NFL draft. Neto Umeozulu, haven't seen a lot from him, but he's been in the program for a while. By all accounts, he's ready to go at left guard. Cole Hudson going into his 4th year with the program. DJ Campbell going into his 4th year with the program. I think those guys are solid. And then Brandon Baker at right tackle. A couple more questions about him, but a former 5-star, one of Texas's highest graded recruits in that class of 2024. I think those guys are good enough to where there's not going to be some major fall in production up front for Texas. And I think if everything goes right, Texas could be even better on the offensive line in 2025. So I don't think Texas needs an upgrade with their starters. I'm worried about the backups. Like, what happens if one or, knock on wood, 2 of those guys go down with injury? Like last year, Texas got very lucky with O-line health, excuse me. The same offensive line started all 12 regular season games. There were some injuries late. Again, Kelvin Banks getting hurt in College Station. Cam Williams got hurt against Clemson. But all things considered, Texas got pretty lucky on the O-line. Neither of those injuries were all that serious. And again, they didn't happen until the final game of the regular season and then postseason play. Maybe that happens again. Hopefully that happens again where Texas can trot out the same 5 big uglies every week. But banking on that happening 2 years in a row, I'm just not sure that that's going to be the case. So you start to take a look at the Texas depth chart on the offensive line, and that's where things get a little bit dicey, especially at left tackle. Because I think a true freshman may be your backup to Trevor Gooseby at that spot. Now, that true freshman is Nick Brooks, who was very highly touted on the recruiting trail. And by all accounts, he is off to a great start to spring practice, and he is a monster of a human being. So he's got the size of somebody who's ready to contribute right away. But y'all don't need me to tell you that it's a scary thought thinking that you're one play away from having a true freshman tasked with the responsibility of protecting Arch Manning's blind side. That's a little scary to me. So if there's some left tackle out there with some experience that can at least compete for a number 2 job, I don't know how many guys are going to be chomping at the bit to go be a backup at Texas, but if someone wants to get a degree from the University of Texas, make a little bit of NIL money, and they're comfortable being that swing tackle, that reserve guy, then I would go find that guy. Just so, again, you don't have to potentially turn to a true freshman to eat up some very important snaps at a very premium position. Now, some of the other O-line spots, you've got some depth. You've got some experience. Andre Kojo at right tackle going into year 3. Jaden Chapman going into year 3. Connor Robertson, center guard, interchangeable guy there. He's going into his 4th year. Those guys could be great. And look, it's worked for Texas. Recruiting and developing high school kids has worked for Kyle Flood these last few years. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That might be the conversations that Sark and Kyle Flood are having behind closed doors right now. But again, I'm just a little worried if the injury bug gets you a little bit more in 2025. I just don't know if you have the experience depth up front on the O-line. That's a position, again, if it's out there, if you could find somebody that won't break the bank, that is willing to come off the bench and be a reserve, I'd get it right, because that's a hugely important position for any college football team, but especially when you have Ohio State and Georgia and the rest of the SEC on your schedule. You need to make sure you've got things buttoned up front in the trenches. And again, I feel pretty strong about the starting 5, but 1 or 2 injuries, I'd be a little bit nervous, and I don't want something like that derailing the Longhorns season. What say you? Do you agree with me, or do you think Texas is fine on the offensive line? Do you trust Sark and Kyle Flood to have this thing right and to get this thing right? And do you trust that they know what they're doing if they don't go out and add 1 more offensive lineman over these next couple of weeks. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube with your thoughts. All right, let's shift gears here. There was no hangover. There was no curse. There was no letdown for Texas baseball at the Dish last night. The Longhorns took care of business in their first game as the #1 team in America. We'll recap the win over UTRGV and slowly start to set the table for this weekend's massive series against Auburn. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Longhorns. Final segment. It's Locked On Longhorns, your team every day. Texas baseball got its revenge last night against UT Rio Grande Valley. Final score 11-4. Texas was 1 out away from run ruling UTRGV. The Longhorns led 11-7 in the top of the 7th. And again, if it's a 10-run or more lead after 7 innings, it's game over. The Longhorns were up by 10. They got 2 outs in the 7th. The Vaqueros of UTRGV strung together a few 2-out hits, scored 3 runs to make it 11-4. So the good news for them, they can brag about not getting run ruled. The good news for Texas, the Longhorns still won pretty easily. Again, 11-4, the final score. We talked about this yesterday, so I'll give just a much briefer version today. 1 year ago today, April 16th, 2024, Texas lost to UTRGV 17-9. It was the first loss to the Vaqueros in 48 games. An embarrassing loss, maybe David Pierce's worst loss, and maybe the loss that kind of got the wheels in motion for a coaching change for Texas baseball. Texas was down 15-1 at one point in that game last year. The pitching staff had 11 walks and 9 hit batters. It was brutal. And that L, again, on this day last year, dropped Texas to 22-16 on the season. What a difference 365 days can make. The Longhorns picked up their 30th win of the year. They are 30-5 so far this season. And of course, Texas, the #1 team in America and the #1 team in the SEC. And we touched on this being a revenge game, not only for the team as a whole, but for a lot of the guys who played in that embarrassing game last season. Jalen Flores, Casey Borba, Will Gasparino, Rylan Galvan, all of those guys were on the field in 2024. Those guys were responsible for all 11 RBIs that Texas had last night. You don't think that one meant a little bit more to them? I know that's the slogan of the SEC. It just means more. But I think last night's Tuesday game just meant a little bit more compared to most midweek games that Texas plays in because of, look, nobody wants to see their coach get fired. And I know those guys had great relationships with David Pierce. They've got great relationships with Schloss too. But still, like that was the loss that kind of spiraled the season out of control. And I think sent a message to Chris Del Conte that maybe this Texas baseball program needed a shift at the top. You got that. Everything has obviously worked, but you don't want to be the guys responsible for a coach getting fired. I think some pride stepped up for some of those Longhorns, some of those returning Longhorns in last night's victory. Jalen Flores, a 2-run double to start things off. Casey Borba, an RBI single. Will Gasparino improved his hit streak, or I should say his on-base streak to 28, not a hit streak, an on-base streak. It's up to 28. He had 4 runs batted in last night. Rylan Galvan had 3 RBIs. By the way, Rylan's brother is on UTRGV, so a pretty cool moment there for the Galvan family. Tommy Farmer, a couple of hits. Easton Winfield got on base a couple of times. That's a guy Texas would love to see step up. Again, the Longhorns have had some problems at left field after they moved Tommy Farmer to right field to replace the injured Max Ballou. They've been rotating a few guys in and out with Duplantier and with Easton Winfield. Adrian Rodriguez has gotten some run in left as well. If you can find somebody consistent there, that's going to help this offense so much more. And one thing to look out for, I mentioned, look, Texas scored 11 runs. You won't complain about that. They won pretty easily. You won't complain about that. But you can go back to this past weekend in that series victory at Kentucky, especially the series finale on Sunday. The top half of the Texas lineup is getting the job done. I mean, that's what you want. You want your big bats to show up just about every day. But you also want production from 6 through 9 as well. And Texas is not quite getting that at the level you would like. So hopefully that's something that can get picked up a little bit for this series against Auburn. And I think Texas is going to need more top to bottom production in that batting order if they want to stay atop the SEC, with some incredibly tough series coming up, including the Tigers in town this weekend. Obviously, a trip to Arkansas, who's currently number 2 in the country. That's a few weeks away. You've got A&M in town next weekend. Yeah, it doesn't get any easier moving forward. Congrats on beating LSU. Congrats on sweeping Georgia. Here's what's up next for Texas baseball. Again, for this team to go on to win this conference and look like a true bona fide national championship contender, they need more production from the bottom of the order. So hopefully we see something like that change. Again, a couple of hits last night from those guys. Would like to see more. Shout out to Cade Bing, who got the start for Texas. He was great. 5 innings, gave up just 1 run, didn't walk anybody. He continues to be a really, really solid option for the Longhorns on those Tuesday games. And good to see Texas take care of business on back-to-back Tuesdays after a few slip-ups earlier in the year. Very quick turnaround. Easter Sunday this weekend. So the series this weekend is shifted up a day. Normally you play Friday to Sunday. This time it is Thursday to Saturday. Again, Auburn in town. Auburn coming off of a sweep of LSU. We all know how good LSU is. Auburn, those Tigers swept the LSU Tigers for the first time since 1988. And again, Auburn ranked either number 7 or number 8, depending on which poll you prefer in college baseball. They are a damn good team. We'll talk way more about them tomorrow, give a little scouting report, and preview the series more in depth. But we'll see if Texas can continue to stay atop the college baseball world. There's been a little bit of a curse, if you will, with teams ranked number 1. We've seen a lot of teams in that number 1 spot in the rankings this year. The reason we've seen a lot is because teams who have gotten there haven't been able to stay there. So hopefully Texas can take care of business. If they sweep Auburn, they obviously will stay number 1. If they take 2 of 3, I think there's a good chance they stay number 1. But if they lose this series, well, you might not be in first place in the league, and you might not be in first place in these polls either. Again, more of a preview coming up tomorrow. But that's going to do it for today's episode. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. If you made it this far, please like, please subscribe, please rate, please share, please leave a comment. All of those great things. Really appreciate you making Locked On Longhorns a part of your day. For your next listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Your favorite Longhorns getting ready for the next level, just 1 week and 1 day away from round 1. Get the latest rankings, rumors, mock drafts, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. More transfer portal chatter tomorrow, more Texas baseball tomorrow, a little Texas basketball conversation as well, as Sean Miller continues to try to find those last couple of scholarship players for his first roster here at Texas. But thank y'all so much for tuning in. Until next time, horns up, mics off. We'll see y'all soon. This is Locked On Longhorns.